DC office right by here. Great to have Google events and see a lot of attention at the developer scene in DC. So appreciate you all coming. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our offerings for elections and ways that you can make use of our API, make use of data, and for those of you that are interested in politics, maybe build things that can have an impact in the election in November. It may seem like the election's been going on forever or is completely decided, but the next 6 weeks are really when the country is going to be making up its mind and when technology is going to be playing a bigger role than ever, and we hope we can do a small part to make it easier for you to do that. So I'll talk a little bit about what our team does, why Google does it, because this is a unique space for Google to be involved in, different from a lot of the other projects that you may have heard about from my colleagues in our other offices today. Then I'll talk about how you can work with some of our software different ways based on really any level of technical time available or abilities. Walk through some of what our API does, and then talk a little bit about some of what we've done internationally in places like Egypt, Mexico, and other countries. And then I'm really hoping to just get a sense, share some ideas about how you can build on top of what we do and build your own extensions, create really amazing, innovative projects, and get ideas really. So I don't think I can possibly talk for 50 minutes straight, so please interrupt with questions at any time, and I hope that by the end we're really just sharing ideas about what interesting things you might be able to make around the election or around politics and government overall, whether or not it uses our stuff. So my team works to answer 3 questions that when you first look at them seem pretty basic. Where do I vote? Who's on my ballot? And how do I vote? And when you start to dive into those, they get to be a lot more complicated. They end up needing the ability of a group like Google to actually really solve those comprehensively. But before I talk about that, I want to say why we care about this. And why we care, because it's not a problem, it's not necessarily a problem you immediately think of as something that Google should be answering. But back in 2007, we had a group of 20% engineers, if you're familiar with the concept of Googlers and spending a day working on their own projects, that were digging through our search trends, and they were looking at queries that had these unusual spiking patterns and how well we were doing. And they very quickly realized that searches like, where do I vote? Where is my polling place? These questions about how you participate in the democratic process have these huge spikes every 4 years, every 2 years for midterms in November in the US, and the same pattern happens worldwide. Now, the spike itself is interesting, but then they looked and said, how well do we actually answer those questions? There's a huge spike in traffic every December 25th around Christmas queries, and we do a pretty good job of those. But when these engineers looked at how well we could answer topics like where do I vote, they found what Google could do was pretty lacking. And that's partly because of how elections are run in the US. You have 50 different states, up to 3,000 different counties. They each run their elections their own way. And that means that some of them, when we looked at it, we found some states, some counties let you look up where you vote online. Most did not. When they did, you were typing in your address in about 10 different fields, entering in your zip +4 that no one knows, and maybe you were getting something back on a site that back in 2008 looked like it would have been better served in 1996. So we set out to try to change that and improve the process. And to do that, we had to dig really deep into what voting information is and a lot of the challenges that are available that presents. And to revisit the 3 questions I raised at the beginning, there are a lot of different factors when you're trying to answer these. Where do I vote? This year, a third of Americans that will vote are not going to vote on election day. That means voting early in the states that offer early vote, voting absentee. So if we only were to tell you where do you go on that Tuesday and cast your ballot, we wouldn't be serving a third of our users. Early voting can get incredibly complicated. If you've seen some of the news this year about leak different counties being able to define different rules for individual polling places to even have different times and details about how you can really vote. What's on my ballot? We normally assume that's who's running for president, who's running for Congress, but a lot of the impact of your vote on election day are these local races, things that might be nonpartisan races or judicial races, school board, and then referendum. If you live around here, you've seen probably more than enough TV ads about referenda that are happening in several states in the region. It's, again, even harder in those cases to make it clear what you're actually voting on. I'm voting to overturn a law that made something illegal. What does that actually mean? How do we make that clear to voters? And then there's how do I vote? And that might sound stupid. It might sound, okay, you go to your polling place, you tell them your name, you pull a lever, you punch a hole, hopefully there's no hanging chat, and you're done. But it actually can get a lot more complicated. There's registration. This year, for the first time, 10 states are allowing you to register to vote online. But in most states, you need to actually print out a form. It's been made a little easier, but you're printing out a form, you're mailing it in, and you're trying to get confirmation of a very manual process. How do you request an absentee ballot? I'm sure many of you heard about voter ID requirements this year, which are an increasing issue in a number of states. And then the final piece of data we realized that we needed to present was how do you contact your election officials? Because we are not the authoritative source of this data. We need to be sure that people have a way to get the definitive answer from their judges in their county. So in addition to just the total amount of that data, it's hard for a couple of other reasons. Like I said, you have different states, different counties and localities running their own elections. And what that means is you had, when we started to say, okay, Secretary of States, give us your, tell us where your polling places are. We found there are hundreds of different data formats. In some cases, there were vendors that were building incompatible systems with each other, and these officials had no capacity to actually give us any data in a machine-readable format, even close to a useful machine-readable format. Sure.
What's the source of the data? It's always official source? It's always official institution?
Sure. Yeah, it varies. So we always get it at some level from the official source, but in some cases we actually, despite all of our efforts, we can't actually get the official source to give us a machine-readable file. So we end up doing a pretty manual process of calling them up, asking, can you at least fax us over something? And the partners we work with then go through and actually enter that in. So at some level, it's all coming from official sources, but it can get in a number of different ways. Then there are also different rules and processes. So I mentioned early vote. We were looking this week actually at, in 49 states in DC, where you early vote is based on your county or your city. That's pretty good. Except in Wisconsin, where you cast your early vote is based on which of 2,100 administrative units you're assigned to. Each one of those 2,100 units has their own early voting locations, their own rules, and none of them have their data in the same format. So getting this done and getting this all together can be a pretty big task. And then the final and toughest problem is actually the timeline of this. A lot of states haven't even finished their primary elections yet. They don't even know who's going to be on their ballot. Election officials are working to maybe get this data out in the second to last week of October. And if you're looking at actually doing anything useful with this information, then starting to build out an application on October 15th to be ready for election day is not a position anyone really wants to be in. So those are some of the challenges to overcome. And what we did was that we, back in 2008, and since then, have worked with election officials, worked with a number of partners to develop standard formats for this data and take on a lot of this grunt work of just aggregating this massive amount of information, making it available in a standard format, making it available to developers, and then ultimately we do this because we want to make it available to our users. So when in 2008, for the first time, when you did a Google search for where to vote, it asked you to enter your address, and you had a map from your address to your polling place using Google Maps. And through this, we've been able to help millions of people find where to vote and other information about voting in the past 4 years. So I now want to walk through a little bit of how you can then make use of all that information and data that we've collected to build out your own applications for elections. So at the highest level, due to the work of Google and as well as a lot of our partners in this space, there is now raw standard data available in standard formats for much of voting information. So we founded an organization called the Voting Information Project with the Pew Charitable Trusts that defined a common XML spec called the Voting Information Project spec, or the VIP spec, that lays out all of the information we need from a Secretary of State to provide this type of service to our users. And at a high level, what it does is it lists out all of the segments of streets in the state, matches them, tells you what precinct you're in, then tells you what your polling place is for each precinct. We also work with an organization that's spun off called the Ballot Information Project that does similar work but for full ballot details. And one of the options that you can do is you can now go to votinginfoproject.org, find their feed repository, download 50 different 10 megabyte XML files and parse those. So if you're looking to build really bulk applications, it can be very powerful. So at a high level, to just give you a sense of what this looks like, this is what is called a street segment. And what that means is it's a portion of a street that all is a part of the same precinct. And this is necessary because, surprisingly, you can vote on a different place from the person across the street from you. These district lines are drawn in such crazy ways that we need to get pretty granular here. So what this portion of the XML shows is that from number 1 to number 10 on Genevieve Street in Annandale, and both odds and even sides of the street, they're in precinct 10101. So the first thing you have to do when you're working with this data is match up the user to one of these segments. Then you look up that precinct, which gives you some additional information, its name, its district, and then it tells you what the polling location is. Not every polling location, not every precinct not every polling location is just for one precinct. They're usually grouped, so we split it out again. And then you can look for the polling location, and you actually then get the address of this polling location is Springfield Elementary, and it can give you some additional details like enter through the gym door and when the polling place is open. So what we do and what you can do if you want to work through these feeds is parse all of that out and be able to end up with the information for an address or a lot of other types of transforms of the data. But we also try to make it a little easier because we found once we had processed this data into a format we needed, we had done a lot of fairly hard, complex work with geodata, geocoding addresses, matching them up to a street segment, and just doing all of that processing at scale for every individual precinct in the U.S. is a pretty computationally intensive task. So we had done all this to build out our own applications, and we made it available in an API that anyone can use. So just about 2 weeks ago now, we launched the Google Civic Information API, which is our version of this service for this cycle and going forward. It's completely free. We do this because we believe it's the right thing to do. We're a part of Google.org, our nonprofit arm. And it allows you to enter in a plain text address, anything you could type into Google Maps, and get back structured JSON with your voting information. And here's the link from developers.google.com/civic information.
Is this link address is valid?
It currently is, but I will talk a little bit at the end about what we've done in other countries too. So just an example of what this is, you just enter in your address, you select what election you're looking for, because even though we're also laser focused on November 6th right now, immediately after November 6th, states start to have more and more elections, and they're just as, if not more important, and we want to be sure we can help there too. And then you get back your info, and I'll walk through that in a second. But if actually using the API may not be feasible, we also make a tool of it. So we're building out an open source client of this API that is what we'll be using to serve voting information on our websites, but is also, because it's open source, is freely available for anyone to modify and build off of to sort of get a jump start, even on what the API gives you for free. It's embeddable by any website with just one line of code, as easy as embedding a YouTube video, which we're hoping can help a lot of these election officials, help candidates who are running in local races, and also local media who might not have the ability to build out their own information lookups. They can just put this on their site and get it to go from there. And then for anyone, this would show like a lot of you, wants to actually dive in and enter code, it's open source under permissive license that lets you that will let you modify it and go from there. And just as a preview of what it will look like, should be available in the next couple of weeks. It lets you enter in your address, will show you your top level races, and then once you've entered in your addresses, show you your polling place on a Google map, easily link out to get directions, find where you can early vote, and then give you details for all of the races on your ballot. So any questions about just the top level 3 ways that we have this available? Sure.
Are you going to provide a mechanism for local precincts to update their information so you guys don't have to go out before every single election in the country and re-update your information?
Yeah, we end up doing that through a lot of partners. So thankfully it's not so bad that every individual precinct could set their own rules, although I think the 2,200 districts in Wisconsin comes pretty close. But yeah, so through the Voting Information Project that we work with, they actually make contact with all of the secretaries of state, and currently about 40 of the states will produce data in their format and do give us updated data throughout. And then for the other 10 states, we're still calling people up, asking them to fax their data over, get it that way. Sure.
Those are all just you may have mentioned this before, I didn't quite hear it, but those are all the candidates. What about things like, ballot initiatives or, bond initiatives and stuff like that for local business? Is that included in this data as well?
Yes.
Okay.
We're working on the best way to display it, which is why you don't see it right here.
Okay. But in the XML, so if I make a call, the JSON feed will come back with that data. Say I'm building a mobile app, it would come back with that in the JSON feed?
Yeah, you'll get some info. We're still working on some of the kinks. There are some additional challenges with that, just because we're
you have a new set of formats to worry about, right?
Right, and just several paragraphs of text is not the easiest way. There's no clear name, like there's no easy way to know Maryland Proposition 7 is the casino proposition, right? It's all, you just get this big block of text. So we're working through it though.
Okay.
And then hopefully if it makes sense, I wanted to walk through a little bit of how our API actually does work. It's incredibly simple. There are only 2 calls right now. So I will actually just be showing you pretty much all that there is to accessing the data here. One of the things we're looking at is, since we've called it now the Civic Information API, how we go beyond just this type of information and how we can show how we can expand other civic info. The most obvious case is, instead of who's on my ballot, who actually represents me, which is something we're going to be trying to tackle. But I would love to hear at the end too, if you have all the thoughts about what other types of data could be useful in developing applications like this. So this is our API documentation, developers.google.com/civic information. And then I'll show how some of these queries work on the API Explorer. The first thing is just an election query, and like I said, that's because we want to let you specify which election, if it's the general election, if it's a primary, or an ongoing special election. So when you run this, you just get a list of elections and an ID for each. It tells you when the election is. Right now we have this test election, which is 2000, where we actually are able to develop right now. And then we have this, the general election, which is 4000, which is what you'd actually want to build against for November 6th. But right now, any development, we don't have a lot of data available for the general election just yet, because it's still getting finalized. So we have a lot of test data available to get started. Then this is actually the voter info query, so you can enter in the election ID. So again, this is the test election right now. You're able to say if you want official data only or not, and what that means is, like your question before, all of this data at some level comes from an official source, but if you restrict it, you'll only get data that has actually been given in a machine-readable format directly from one of these authorities. Otherwise, it'll be data that we've sort of collected a little bit more manually. And we give you some options of what fields, and then the actual only request body is the address in plain text. So this is the address of the Google office in Chapel Hill. North Carolina is one of the states we have test data for. So when you execute that there, you get a fairly large block of JSON back, giving you the details about the election, the normalized address, and then the first big thing is your polling location. So the address here of Mary Scroggs Elementary School, where when it's open, and then for every piece of data, we're telling you where we're getting it from. A lot of it comes from the Voting Information Project. Other pieces will come from some of the other data partners we work with. You then get a list of all of the contests that are available, so as well as what order it is on the ballot, even though currently they're not being returned in that order, and you can reorder them if you want. And you're able to say these are the judicial elections, lieutenant governor, and then some of the more recognizable things like the presidential election, who the candidates are. So there are just 3 candidates on the ballot. President Obama, Mitt Romney, and then Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate. It also has the option to provide some additional contact information for each candidate. We don't have it right now, but we can also provide, we will be providing things like their website, email, like phone contact numbers, along with social media profiles, which can enable you to do some really cool things. And so you can just scroll through here, you see there are quite a few races. And then when you get to the bottom, the jurisdiction and official information is what lets you give users the ability to double check with the people that are actually managing their elections. So you can find the URLs for registering to vote at the official locator for a polling place if one exists, addresses, and then names and emails of the actual people who are in charge of these. Any questions on the API? Just some of the other things that if you do take a crack at the API that you'll notice are, let's scroll back up. If I type in a nonsense address, it will obviously just tell you that it's an unparsable address, although it apparently did try to parse that address somehow. Apparently we're in Northern Cape. But then a lot of the times,